Welcome to Midnight Whispers Stories, and tonight, you're about to hear 9 of the most disturbing real encounters ever reported in small-town Alberta. Ghost lights that move with intent. Creatures walking on 2 legs deep in the forest. Shadows circling grain elevators. And a lake predator older than any legend. These aren't stories people like to repeat. They're stories people try to forget. Stay with us until the end, because the final case contains a detail investigators refuse to release to the public, until now. Story 1. Ghost lights over Pincher Creek. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in the foothills outside Pincher Creek. Those lights are real. They move with purpose, and whatever intelligence guides them does not want to be found. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a geophysicist from Denver, and 3 weeks ago I crossed the Canadian border hunting answers about a colleague who vanished without explanation. Dr. Sarah Chen disappeared in October 2003 while investigating anomalous electromagnetic readings near Pincher Creek, Alberta. The official report called it a hiking accident. Her body was never recovered. What they did not mention was the terrifying footage on her camera, or the journal entries describing glowing spheres that seemed to watch her from the darkness. The locals in Pincher Creek do not talk about the lights anymore. Not openly. When I asked questions at the diner on Main Street, conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes dropped to coffee cups. One elderly rancher leaned close and whispered that some things in the foothills should stay buried. His hands shook as he spoke. That reaction told me everything. Fear like that does not come from folklore. It comes from experience. I rented a truck and drove west into the rolling prairie that gives way to mountains. Sarah's last known location was a remote valley 15 miles from town, accessible only by logging roads that barely qualified as roads at all. The landscape felt wrong immediately. Too quiet. No birds. No wind through the grass. Just an oppressive silence that made my ears ring. The October sky hung low and gray, pressing down like a coffin lid. I set up camp near the coordinates from Sarah's GPS. Her notes described the lights appearing after sunset, always in the same general area, moving in patterns that defied natural explanation. Ball lightning, some scientists suggested. Swamp gas, atmospheric reflections. But Sarah was no amateur. She held 2 PhDs. If she said these phenomena demonstrated intelligent behavior, I believed her. And if they were dangerous enough to make her disappear, I needed to know why. The first night, nothing happened. I sat in my tent with recording equipment, thermal cameras, and enough battery power to run everything until dawn. The darkness beyond my campfire was absolute. No moon, no stars, just an ocean of black that seemed to swallow even the firelight. I kept checking my watch, counting hours, fighting the creeping sensation that something was watching from just beyond the light. The second night changed everything. The lights appeared at 9:47. I know the exact time because I was reviewing Sarah's journal when my electromagnetic field detector started screaming. The needle pinned to maximum. Every hair on my body stood up from static charge. When I stumbled out of the tent, I saw them. 3 glowing spheres hung above the valley floor, each about the size of a beach ball, pulsing with a sickly yellow-green luminescence. They moved independently but somehow in coordination, like schools of fish turning in perfect unison. The light they cast was wrong. It illuminated nothing. Objects near the spheres remained shrouded in shadow even as the glow intensified. That was when real fear started crawling up my spine. I grabbed my camera and started filming. The spheres drifted closer, maybe 200 yards away, bobbing gently as if testing the air. Then one broke away from the group and accelerated directly toward my position. No arc, no drift, a straight line, fast. The electromagnetic readings went haywire. My compass spun uselessly. The fillings in my teeth ached. I ran, pure instinct. I crashed through brush and stumbled over rocks, my flashlight beam jerking wildly. Behind me, that horrible glow grew brighter, casting my fleeing shadow long and distorted across the ground. I could hear a sound now, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in my chest cavity and made my vision blur. The sound was not mechanical. It felt organic, alive, hungry. I dug behind an outcropping of limestone and killed my light. In the sudden darkness, I watched the sphere drift past my hiding spot, maybe 30 feet away. Up close, it was not smooth. The surface churned and writhed like a living thing, patterns shifting across its skin that almost resembled symbols or language. The air around it smelled of ozone and something else, something rotten and ancient. Then it stopped, just hung there, waiting. For 10 minutes I did not breathe. The sphere remained motionless, its pulsing slowing to a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. I realized with horror that it was searching for me. Testing. Listening. The intelligence behind this thing was undeniable. This was not weather. Not geology. This was something else entirely. Something that defied every law of physics I had spent my career studying. Finally, mercifully, it drifted away to rejoin the others. All three lights rose vertically, climbed into the low clouds, and vanished. The electromagnetic readings dropped to 0. Normal silence returned. But it felt different now. Contaminated. I stayed behind that rock until dawn, too terrified to move, replaying what I had witnessed and trying to convince myself I had not lost my mind. When I returned to camp at sunrise, my tent was collapsed. Not torn, not damaged, folded inward as if something had pressed down from above with tremendous force. My equipment was dead, every battery drained to nothing, every memory card corrupted beyond recovery, and in the dirt near the fire pit, I found something that made my blood turn cold. A perfect circle had been burned into the ground. The soil was fused to glass in a ring maybe 8 feet across, with Sarah's name etched in the center. Not written, etched, as if carved with tremendous heat in handwriting I recognized from her journal. Someone or something wanted me to know she had been here, that she had been taken, that I would be next if I stayed. I should have left. Any rational person would have. But I kept thinking about Sarah's final journal entry, the one the authorities never released. She described a pattern to the lights, a sequence she believed was communication. She thought if she could decode it, she might understand what they wanted. Her last words were haunting. They are not random. They are searching, and I think they have finally found what they came for. On the third night, I went back to that valley armed with a theory. Sarah was a geologist. She studied rare earth minerals and unusual rock formations. What if these lights were drawn to something in the earth itself? Some electromagnetic signature or energy source humans could barely detect. What if Sarah stumbled onto their feeding ground or nesting site, and they saw her as a threat? The lights appeared again at exactly 9:47. Like clockwork, 3 spheres rising from the valley floor, pulsing in sequence. I watched through binoculars from a safe distance, tracking their movement. They circled the same area repeatedly, a patch of exposed bedrock near a dry creek. Then they descended and appeared to merge with the stone itself, the glow fading until nothing remained. I waited 30 minutes. The silence was suffocating. Then I approached the bedrock with my Geiger counter and ground-penetrating radar. What I found defied explanation. A cavity existed beneath the surface, maybe 20 feet down, perfectly spherical and roughly the size of a small room. The walls radiated residual heat, and the radiation readings were through the roof, not dangerous levels, but consistent with long-term exposure to some unknown energy source. I realized with dawning horror what this place was. A nest, a charging station, a home. These lights were not visitors or phenomena. They lived here, had been here for decades, maybe centuries. The indigenous peoples of this region had stories about ghost lights and spirit orbs long before European settlers arrived. The ranchers knew, the town knew, everyone knew but kept silent because what else could they do? You cannot fight something you do not understand. You cannot kill light. That was when I heard movement behind me. Rocks shifting. I spun around and saw nothing in the darkness. But I felt it, a presence. Multiple presences. The air grew thick with static electricity. My skin prickled. Then the lights erupted from the ground all around me. Not 3 this time, but dozens. A swarm of glowing spheres rising like bubbles in water, surrounding me in a perfect circle. They pulsed in unison now, the rhythm matching my heartbeat exactly. I understood then what Sarah must have felt in her final moments. Not just fear, recognition. These things were studying me the same way scientists study insects under glass. Measuring, cataloging, deciding. The hum grew louder, resonating in my bones. Images flashed through my mind that were not my own. Vast stretches of time, geological epochs, mountains rising and falling. And these lights, always the lights, drifting through millennia, eternal and patient and utterly alien. They were older than human civilization, older than our species. They had watched the Ice Age come and go. They would watch our cities crumble to dust. One sphere drifted toward my face. I could feel heat radiating from it, see patterns shifting across its surface, symbols that almost made sense in some deep, primal part of my brain. It hovered inches from my eyes. Then it pulled back and the entire swarm rose into the sky, climbing higher and higher until they were stars, until they were gone. I collapsed. When I came to, dawn had broken. My nose was bleeding. Both my cameras were melted slag, and carved into my forearm in precise letters, burned into the flesh, were coordinates. Not to this valley, to somewhere else, somewhere remote in the Northwest Territories, hundreds of miles from any town. I drove back to Pincher Creek in a daze. I tried to warn the authorities, but they smiled politely and sent me on my way with the same patronizing tone they must have used with Sarah. I tried posting about it online, but my accounts were deleted within hours. Someone, or something, did not want this information spreading. So I am telling you now, while I still can. Those lights are real. They are intelligent, and they are spreading. Reports have surfaced from Wyoming, Montana, even northern Colorado. Always the same pattern, always the foothills, always the terrifying silence afterward. Sarah understood something crucial before she vanished. These lights are not here to harm us, not directly. They are here because they have always been here. We build our cities and roads and lives on top of their territory, and they tolerate us the way you might tolerate ants in your kitchen. Mostly, until you become interesting, until you look too closely, until you threaten to expose what they are. I have the coordinates burned into my skin. I know I should not go. Every rational part of my mind screams to forget what I saw, to move on, to accept that some mystery should remain unsolved. But I cannot stop thinking about Sarah, his last words. They have finally found what they came for. What if she was right? What if these lights have been searching for something all along? Some element or energy or person that completes whatever purpose drives them. What if I am next? What if the markings on my arm are not a warning, but an invitation? I leave for the Northwest Territories tomorrow. I will take better equipment this time, better cameras, redundant systems. I will document everything and upload it to secure servers before they can delete it. The world needs to know what exists in those remote places where humans rarely venture. The world needs to understand that we are not alone, and we never have been. If you are reading this and I have not returned, do not look for me. Do not follow the lights. They are searching, always searching, and when they find what they want, they do not let go. The ghost lights over Pincher Creek are still there tonight, glowing above the foothills, moving with purpose through the darkness. And somewhere in that ancient dance of light and shadow, Sarah Chen is still watching. Still warning, still hoping someone will finally understand before it is too late. I think I am beginning to. Story 2, Nightwalkers of Sundre. They were standing at the edge of my campsite when I woke up. 3 of them, impossibly tall, pale as moonlight, just watching. I should have died that night in the Alberta wilderness. The fact that I am here, telling this story, does not mean I escaped. It means they let me go. And that is so much worse. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a 42-year-old insurance adjuster from Phoenix, Arizona. I live a boring life on purpose. Predictable routines, safe choices, no risks. But last September, I decided to do something different. I decided to go camping alone in the Canadian Rockies, just north of a small town called Sundre. I wanted to disconnect, to find some peace away from screens and spreadsheets and the crushing weight of a life that felt increasingly meaningless. I found something else instead. The drive from the border took longer than expected. Highway 22 stretched through endless forests and rolling hills, the kind of landscape that looks beautiful in daylight but feels hostile after dark. I reached the camping area just before sunset, a dispersed site about 8 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a rough logging road that tested my rental SUV's suspension. The site was perfect. A small clearing surrounded by towering pines, a creek running nearby, mountains visible in the distance. I set up my tent quickly, started a fire, and cooked a simple dinner while the sky turned from gold to purple to black. The silence was remarkable. No traffic, no voices, just wind through trees and the occasional crack of settling wood in the fire. I felt good, peaceful, like I had made the right choice. That feeling lasted about 2 hours. The first sign something was wrong came around 10 at night. I was sitting by the fire, reading a paperback western by headlamp, when I heard movement in the forest. Not animal movement, too deliberate, too careful. It sounded like someone walking through the underbrush, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. I called out, asking if anyone was there. My voice sounded small and weak in the vast darkness beyond my fire's glow. No response. The movement stopped. I waited, listening, my heart starting to beat faster. After 5 minutes of silence, I convinced myself it had been a deer or elk. Wildlife. Nothing scary, nothing dangerous, except deer do not stop and listen when you call out to them. Deer run. I tried to go back to reading but could not focus. The woods felt different now. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper, more substantial. I caught myself glancing up every few seconds, scanning the darkness, searching for movement or eyes reflecting firelight. I saw nothing, but I felt watched. That primitive instinct we all carry, the one that kept our ancestors alive on the African savanna, was screaming that something was out there, studying me. At 11:30, I gave up and retreated to my tent. I zipped it shut, turned off my headlamp, and lay in my sleeping bag, listening. The darkness inside the tent felt suffocating. Every sound became magnified. The wind, the creak, the settling of the tent fabric. And beneath it all, something else. A faint rustling that might have been nothing or might have been everything. I must have fallen asleep eventually, exhausted by adrenaline and travel. But I woke suddenly at 3:47 in the morning, according to my phone. My body was rigid with fear before my mind understood why. Then I heard it, breathing, just outside my tent, slow and steady. Human, but wrong somehow. Too deep, too controlled. I held my breath. Not moving, not making a sound. The breathing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Footsteps moved around the tent. Not heavy boots, something softer, something that barely made any noise at all despite the rocky ground. The footsteps circled completely around my tent, then stopped at the entrance. I could see a shadow through the tent fabric. Tall, very tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more. It stood there, absolutely motionless, for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything except lie there frozen. But some deep survival instinct told me that moving would be the worst possible choice. So I waited in the suffocating darkness, barely breathing, while something horrifying stood inches away from me with only a thin layer of nylon between us. Then it walked away. I heard the soft footsteps receding into the forest, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. I did not sleep again that night. I lay in my sleeping bag, clutching my phone like a lifeline, watching the darkness gradually give way to gray dawn. When enough light filtered through the tent, I unzipped the entrance and looked outside. My campsite looked normal. The fire had burned down to cold ashes. My cooking gear sat where I had left it. Nothing appeared disturbed or moved. I almost convinced myself I had experienced a nightmare, a vivid dream brought on by sleeping in an unfamiliar place. Then I walked around my tent and saw the footprints. They were unlike anything I had seen before. Elongated, at least 18 inches long, narrow, almost like human feet but stretched and distorted. And they were everywhere, dozens of them, circling my tent multiple times, approaching and retreating, pacing back and forth as if whatever made them had been studying my shelter, deciding what to do. The truly disturbing detail was how deep they pressed into the soft earth. Whatever had made these prints was heavy, very heavy, far too heavy for the narrow, delicate shape of the footprints to support. It defied physics. It defied logic. I should have left immediately, packed up and driven straight back to civilization. But I am stubborn, and I hate giving up on things I have committed to. I told myself there was a rational explanation, a practical joke by locals, some kind of animal I was not familiar with. Anything except the truth that was trying to force itself into my mind. I spent the day hiking, trying to enjoy the beautiful wilderness, trying to forget the terrifying night. The area was stunning. Dense forests opened onto meadows full of wildflowers. Crystal clear streams cut through rocky gorges. I saw elk in the distance, eagles overhead, and evidence of bears that thankfully stayed away from me. But I also found something else. About 3 miles from my campsite, I discovered an old trail that was not on any of my maps. It looked abandoned, overgrown with vegetation, but still visible if you knew what to look for. I followed it for maybe half a mile before I found the tent. It was shredded, completely destroyed. The fabric hung in tatters from bent poles, torn by something with incredible force. The destruction was not random. It was methodical. Long vertical slashes, perfectly spaced, as if something with claws or blades had systematically cut through every surface. My blood ran cold. I recognized the tent model. It was the same brand I was using, just an older version. And scattered around the destroyed campsite were personal items. A water bottle, a backpack with government logos, a hat with RCMP stitched across the front. This was not some random abandoned campsite. This was a crime scene, or the site of something worse. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but of course there was no signal. I was miles into the wilderness, surrounded by mountains that blocked any cellular connection. I took photos of everything, documenting the destruction, the strange slashes, the scattered equipment. Then I got out of there as fast as I could, half running back toward my own campsite. The sun was setting by the time I made it back. I had maybe 30 minutes of light left. I stood at the edge of my clearing, breathing hard, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up and leave immediately, but the rough logging road was dangerous in daylight and potentially deadly in darkness. I could easily get stuck or drive off an embankment. I was trapped. I had to spend another night in this place. This haunted, eerie, terrifying place where something walked on feet that should not exist and destroyed tents with methodical violence. I built a fire bigger than necessary, creating a ring of light that pushed back the shadows. I kept my car keys in my pocket and my phone in my hand. I did not bother with the tent. I would sleep sitting up by the fire, staying alert, ready to run at the first sign of danger. Full darkness fell. The forest came alive with sounds, animals moving through underbrush, owls calling, the wind picking up, making the pines creak and groan. Normal sounds, natural sounds, except they all felt like camouflage now, like the forest itself was trying to hide something much worse beneath layers of ordinary noise. At 9:15, I saw the first one. It emerged from between two trees at the very edge of my firelight. Tall, so impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more. Pale skin that seemed to glow with a faint luminescence, like something deep-sea creatures have, adapted to eternal darkness. Long arms that hung past where knees should be, and a face. God help me, it had a face that was almost human but stretched vertically, elongated, with eyes too large and a mouth that seemed to extend too far back toward the ears. It stood there, just watching me, not moving, not making any sound, just observing with those huge, dark eyes that reflected my firelight like a cat. Psst. Then a second one appeared on the opposite side of my campsite. Same height, same terrible wrongness, also watching, also silent. Then a third, then a fourth. Within minutes, there were at least 7 of these things surrounding my camp, standing just beyond the firelight, creating a ring of pale, watching figures that studied me with inhuman patience. I could not move, could not breathe, could not think clearly. My mind was shutting down, unable to process what I was seeing. These were not animals. They were not human. They existed in some horrifying space between categories, something that should not be possible but was standing right there, undeniable and real. They began to move, not toward me, around me, circling in a slow, deliberate pattern, always maintaining the same distance from my fire. They moved with an unsettling grace, their long limbs flowing in ways that made my eyes hurt to watch. And they were studying me. I could feel their attention, their focus, their curiosity about this small, frightened creature sitting by a tiny fire in the middle of their territory. This went on for hours. They circled. I sat frozen. The fire burned down. I threw on more wood with shaking hands, desperate to keep the light burning, convinced that darkness meant death. They watched every movement I made, their heads tilting in unison, processing my actions with alien intelligence. Around 2 in the morning, they stopped moving. They all turned to face me directly, standing in perfect stillness. Then, in a moment I will never forget, they all took one step forward together. Closer, into my circle of light. I could see them clearly now, could see the texture of their pale skin, could see their impossibly long fingers, could see the way their bodies seemed to bend and flex in ways that violated human anatomy. I stood up, ready to run for my car. But where could I go? They surrounded me completely. The moment I broke from my vehicle, they would be on me. I was sure of it. Then the tallest one, the one directly in front of me, raised one long arm and pointed past me, into the darkness beyond my campsite, toward the forest. It held that position for several seconds, pointing, its huge eyes locked on mine. It was showing me something, or warning me about something, or giving me a direction. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they all stepped backward into the shadows and vanished. One moment they were there, a ring of pale nightmares surrounding my dying fire. The next moment, nothing. Just darkness and trees and the terrible certainty that they were still out there, watching from places I could not see. I did not sleep. I sat by that fire until dawn, feeding it constantly, keeping the flames high, praying for sunrise. When the first gray light appeared, I packed my gear faster than I have ever done anything in my life. I threw everything into my car, not caring about organization or cleanliness, just desperate to leave. The drive out seemed to take forever. The rough logging road tested my nerves as much as my vehicle. But finally, I reached the highway, then the town of Sundre, then civilization. I stopped at the first RCMP station I found and tried to report what I had seen. The officer listened politely but with obvious skepticism. When I mentioned the destroyed tent with RCMP gear, his expression changed. He made some calls, checked some files, then told me something that made my blood run cold. A hiker had gone missing in that exact area in the summer of 2011. They found his tent slashed to pieces. No body, no blood, no tracks anywhere around the site despite soft earth that should have shown footprints. The case remained unsolved. They eventually classified it as an animal attack, though no expert could identify what kind of animal could have caused that specific pattern of destruction. The officer said they sometimes got reports from campers and hikers in that region. Strange sightings, unusual footprints, people who felt watched or followed in the deep woods. The locals had a name for them, the nightwalkers. Tall figures that appeared after dark, standing at the edges of campsites, watching from tree lines, following solo hikers through the forest. No official explanation existed, no scientific classification, just stories passed down and a growing list of unexplained incidents that the authorities quietly documented but never publicly acknowledged. I drove straight back to Phoenix, 14 hours without stopping except for gas. I wanted distance. I wanted city lights and traffic and noise and people. I wanted to be surrounded by concrete and civilization and everything that pushed back against the wild darkness of places where things like that could exist. But it did not help. 3 months later, I still see them when I close my eyes. Those pale, elongated figures. Those two large eyes. The way they moved around my campsite with inhuman grace. The way they all pointed into the darkness, showing me something I was too terrified to investigate. I have done research, obsessive, exhaustive research. I have found dozens of similar reports from across North America. Tall, pale figures in forests. Campers who felt watched. Hikers who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Tents found destroyed with no logical explanation. The incidents cluster in remote wilderness areas, places where humans rarely go, places where the wild still holds secrets we cannot explain. Some people say they are aliens. Others claim they are interdimensional beings. Some think they are remnants of an ancient human subspecies that retreated into the deep wilderness to avoid extinction. The truth is nobody knows. Nobody has captured one or found a body or produced any evidence that satisfies scientific scrutiny. All we have are stories. Frightening, consistent stories from people who sound scared and honest and desperate to be believed. I am one of those people now. I know what I saw. I know those things exist. And I know they let me live that night when they could have easily torn through my tent and done to me whatever they did to that missing hiker. The question that haunts me is why? Why did they let me go? What were they showing me when they pointed into that darkness? Was it a warning? A direction? An invitation? I will never go back to find out. But I think about it constantly. I think about those woods north of Sundre. I think about the night walkers standing in their circle, studying me with alien curiosity. I think about all the people who have vanished in remote forests, their tents found shredded, no bodies ever recovered. And I think about the fact that wilderness is shrinking. Development is spreading. Human presence is expanding into every corner of the planet. What happens when we finally push into the last refuges of things that were here long before us? Things that want to be left alone. Things that are capable of horror beyond our understanding when threatened or disturbed. I do not camp anymore. I stay in cities. I avoid forests. I keep my distance from any place wild enough to hide secrets. Because I know now that we share this world with things we do not understand. Things that watch us from shadows and tree lines. Things that walk at night on feet that should not exist. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder if they're still watching me. If they marked me somehow during those hours of terror. If they will come for me eventually, walking through city streets as easily as they moved through that forest, appearing outside my window in the small hours before dawn. The scariest part is not knowing. It is the uncertainty. The knowledge that the world contains real horror that cannot be explained or controlled or escaped. And that horror is patient. It has existed for centuries or millennia. It can wait. I survived the night walkers of Sundre, but I will never be free of them. They are in my mind now, in my nightmares, in every shadow that seems too deep and every sound that seems too deliberate. They showed me the truth, that we are not alone, that we are not safe, that the darkness holds things more terrifying than any monster we have invented in our stories. And they are still out there, still watching, still waiting, still walking at the edges of our world, just beyond the firelight, patient and pale and impossibly tall. Story 3. Shadow that circles. I should have listened when the gas station attendant told me not to stop in Carmangay after sunset. But I was chasing a story, and journalists like me never listen to warnings. That was 3 months ago. I still have nightmares about what I saw circling that windmill. The thing is, I went there looking for something scary, something creepy to boost my channel views. I specialized in urban legends and forgotten places across North America. My YouTube numbers had been dropping, and I needed content that would hit hard with the algorithm. Horror sells. Fear travels fast. I knew if I could capture something truly disturbing on camera, something unsettling and real, my channel would explode overnight. The Carmangay windmill shadow figure had been whispered about since the 90s. Locals in southern Alberta spoke about it in hushed tones, never wanting to give too many details. A humanoid silhouette that circled the historic grain elevator after darkness fell. Tall, impossibly thin, moving in ways that made your stomach turn. There were stories about people who had tried to film it. Most gave up. One journalist apparently captured footage but never published it. He vanished months later. No body, no explanation. Just gone. That should have been my first red flag. But I convinced myself it was all part of the legend, the kind of horrifying detail that makes a story stick. I told myself I was smarter than whoever came before me. I arrived in Carmangay on a Wednesday in late October. The town was barely a town anymore, just a handful of buildings scattered along Highway 3, dying slowly like so many prairie settlements. The grain elevator stood at the edge of everything, a towering wooden relic from another era. In daylight, it looked almost noble, a monument to agriculture and hard work. But as the sun started dropping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and purple, the structure changed. Shadows grew longer, the wind picked up, making the old wood creak and groan. I set up my camera equipment near the base of the elevator, mounting my main camera on a tripod and keeping a handheld for closer shots. My plan was simple: capture whatever appeared after dark, narrate the experience in real time, and upload the raw footage. Authenticity mattered to my audience. They could smell fake content from miles away. This needed to feel real because it would be real. The temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared. That is normal for the prairie in autumn, but this felt different. The cold seemed to press against my skin, invasive and deliberate. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked my equipment. Everything was recording. The grain elevator loomed above me, a dark mass against the darkening sky. I could hear the wind moving through the gaps in the wooden walls, producing a low moan that set my nerves on edge. Then I heard it, footsteps, not the crunch of gravel or the scuff of boots, something else, a sliding, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my handheld camera and turned toward the noise. Nothing, just darkness and the skeletal outline of the grain elevator. The sound came again, circling around to my left. I spun, camera raised, finger on the record button. The viewfinder showed only shadows and the faint glow of my equipment lights. But I felt it. Someone or something was watching me. The sensation crawled up my spine, primal and undeniable. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, to pack up my gear and drive back to the highway. But I stayed, because that is what I did. I chased fear. I documented the unknown, and my viewers expected nothing less. The circling continued, slow, methodical, never coming close enough for me to see clearly. I kept filming, narrating in whispers, describing the creepy atmosphere, the chilling sounds, the way the darkness seemed to move with intention. My breath formed clouds in the freezing air. My fingers went numb despite my gloves. Then it stepped into the light. I have tried to describe what I saw that night, but words fail. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, stretched and wrong. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at angles that made my eyes hurt. The silhouette was perfectly black, darker than the night around it, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. And it moved. God, the way it moved. Not walking, gliding, circling the base of the grain elevator in smooth, horrible rotations. I kept filming. My hands shook so badly the footage was probably unusable, but I kept the camera pointed at that thing. It never acknowledged me directly, never turned toward me, but I knew it was aware. I could feel its attention like pressure behind my eyes. The shadow figure completed one full circle, then another. Each rotation brought it slightly closer to where I stood. My breathing got faster. Panic started setting in, not the exciting fear I had felt exploring abandoned buildings or investigating haunted locations. This was terror. Pure, animal terror that made me want to run screaming into the night. But I did not run. I stood there, frozen, camera recording, watching this impossible thing circle that grain elevator like a predator stalking prey. On its fifth rotation, it stopped, directly in front of me, still 20 feet away, but close enough that I could make out details I wish I had never seen. The figure had no face, just a smooth void where features should be. But I felt eyes on me, felt something ancient and hungry studying me from within that darkness. My camera battery died. The red recording light blinked out, plunging me into deeper darkness. I fumbled for my backup camera, hands trembling, breath coming in short gasps. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. Silence, complete and absolute. Even the wind had stopped. The grain elevator stood motionless, just an old building in the dark. I could have convinced myself I imagined the whole thing except for one detail. My main camera, the one on the tripod, was still recording. I could see the tiny red light glowing steadily. I had 12 minutes of footage on that camera, 12 minutes of whatever that thing was circling the elevator. I packed up my equipment faster than I ever had before, threw everything in my truck and drove back to the highway without looking back. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The 2-hour drive to Lethbridge felt like an eternity. Every shadow on the road looked like that figure. Every dark shape in my peripheral vision made my heart skip. I checked into a motel and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. I kept seeing that silhouette, kept feeling its attention pressing down on me. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and opened my laptop. I needed to see the footage, needed to confirm what I had witnessed. The files from both cameras were corrupted, not partially damaged or glitchy. Completely unusable. 12 minutes of recording reduced to digital noise and artifacts. I tried every recovery program I knew, spent hours attempting to salvage even a single frame. Nothing worked. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. When I listened to the audio from my handheld camera, I heard something I had not noticed in the moment. Underneath the wind in my whispered narration, there was another sound. Breathing, deep, rhythmic breathing that matched the circling pattern of the shadow figure. And words, faint but unmistakable, the same phrase repeated over and over in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. Tell them all, bring them here. I deleted everything that night, erased every file, formatted every memory card, destroyed the physical recordings. I told myself I was being paranoid. That fear was making me irrational. But I could not shake the feeling that something had followed me back from Carmangay. That by filming that thing, I had invited it into my life. For weeks, nothing happened. I stopped making videos, stopped researching urban legends. I convinced myself the experience had been a one-time nightmare, a cautionary tale about chasing scary content in dangerous places. Then people started asking about my channel. Why had I stopped uploading? Where were the new videos? Some viewers mentioned they had heard about the Carmangay windmill, asked if I had ever investigated it. The comments kept coming, dozens every day, all variations of the same question. Had I seen the shadow figure? I never told anyone about my trip to Carmangay, never posted about it, never mentioned it in comments or social media. There was no way anyone could have known, but the questions kept coming. Last week, I received a package. No return address, postmarked from Alberta. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. The note said, "You were not the first. You will not be the last. It wants to be seen. It wants to be shared. Every view feeds it. Every mention makes it stronger. Stop now while you still can." I should have thrown the USB drive away. Should have burned it and never looked back. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially for someone who built a career on investigating the unknown. The drive contained video files, dozens of them, different cameras, different years, all showing the same thing, the shadow figure circling the Carmangay grain elevator. Some footage was old, grainy film from what looked like the 80s or 90s. Others were recent, shot on modern equipment. And in every video, the figure looked directly at the camera at some point. That smooth, featureless void turning toward whoever was filming. The last file was different. It was footage of me, my setup at the grain elevator, my reactions, my panic as the shadow appeared. But the angle was wrong. The camera position showed me from above and behind, from a perspective that should have been impossible. Someone or something had filmed me while I filmed it. At the end of the video, after I packed up and drove away, the camera remained. It showed the grain elevator in darkness, silent and still. Then the shadow figure appeared again, closer to the camera at this point. So close I could see texture in the darkness, patterns that hurt to look at directly. And then it smiled. I know that sounds impossible. The thing had no face. But somehow, It smiled. A terrible, knowing expression that conveyed satisfaction and hunger and patience all at once. The video ended with text appearing on screen. See you soon. That was 5 days ago. Since then, I have been seeing the figure. Not in Alberta. Not at the grain elevator. Here, in my city, outside my apartment window at night. In the parking garage where I keep my truck. Always at the edge of my vision. Always circling. Getting closer with each sighting. I tried reporting it to the police. They suggested I see a therapist, maybe take a break from stressful work. I tried reaching out to other paranormal investigators, people who might understand. Most ignored me. One wrote back with a single sentence. Stop talking about it and maybe it will forget you. But I cannot stop, because I finally understand what that thing is and what it wants. The Carmangay Shadow Figure is not a ghost or a monster. It is something older, something that feeds on attention and fear. Every story told about it makes it stronger. Every video filmed, every article written, every conversation whispered in dark corners gives it more power. And I fell right into its trap. I went there looking for scary content. I wanted something horrifying and creepy that would terrify my audience. I wanted views and clicks and engagement. I got exactly what I asked for. Now it wants payment. It wants me to share what I saw, to tell the story, to post the videos, to spread the legend further. Every share would feed it. Every view would make it more real. And I know that if I refuse, if I stay silent, it will simply take what it wants anyway. So here I am, telling you this story, warning you, the Carmangay Shadow Figure is real. It circles that grain elevator every night, waiting for the next person curious enough or foolish enough to go looking for it. And once you see it, once you acknowledge its existence, it sees you too. I am leaving town tomorrow, driving east, as far as I can get from Alberta. Maybe distance will help. Maybe it cannot follow beyond a certain range. But I doubt it, because late last night, I looked out my bedroom window and saw it standing in the parking lot below. Just standing there, waiting. And here's the truly chilling part, the detail that keeps me awake every night. It was not alone anymore. There were others with it. Tall, stretched silhouettes standing perfectly still in the darkness. And I recognized some of them. The shapes, the way they stood. They looked like people from the videos on that USB drive. The journalist who vanished, the others who had filmed the shadow over the years. They were all there, transformed, circling, waiting for the next person to join them. I do not know how much time I have left. The figure appears closer every night, and the distance between sightings grows shorter. Soon there will be nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. It will circle me the way it circles that grain elevator, patient and relentless, until I become just another shadow in the darkness. If you are hearing this, if my story reached you, do me one favor. Do not go looking for the Carmangay Shadow Figure. Do not drive out to that grain elevator after dark. Do not film it or investigate it or try to prove it exists. Because it does exist. And once it knows you are looking, it will never stop looking back. The scary truth is that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some legends exist as warnings, not invitations. And some things in the darkness should stay forgotten. I learned that lesson too late. Do not make the same mistake I did. Story 4. Red Lake Creature. I'm alive. That's the only reason I can tell you this. And I shouldn't. If you understand what happened to me on Red Lake in High Level, Alberta, you'll know that I should be dead. That I should have been torn apart like the others before me. But somehow, I survived. And now I know things that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid thinking about. Things that will change how you see the water, how you see nature, and how you understand the real dangers that lurk beneath the surface of our world. This happened in the summer of 2004. I was 42 years old, a normal guy, worked in construction, had a wife and 2 kids, spent weekends fishing because it was the one place I could find peace away from the noise and chaos of everyday life. I had no idea that I was walking into a nightmare that would shatter that peace forever. Red Lake sits in the northern reaches of Alberta, surrounded by dense forest. Most people don't know it exists. It is not on many maps. The nearest town is High Level, about 20 minutes away. It is isolated, quiet, the kind of place where the only sounds are wind, water, and the occasional bird. Or at least that's what I thought. I'd been fishing Red Lake for 3 years without incident. I knew the local fishing community. There were maybe 20 of us who regularly came out here. Experienced guys, people who respected the water. We catch northern pike and walleye. We share stories about our best catches. Nobody ever mentioned anything eerie. Nothing scary. Just a beautiful lake in the middle of nowhere where a man could escape. But I started noticing things. Small things at first. One of the regular fishers, a guy named Tom, stopped coming out. Nobody thought much about it. People get busy. But then another guy, Rick, stopped showing up too. When I asked their wives at the local store, they said their husbands had just lost interest in fishing. They didn't want to talk about Red Lake anymore. There was something unsettling in their faces when I asked why, a kind of fear they couldn't quite articulate. Then I heard about what happened in 1989. A wildlife officer named Dale Hornsby had gone out to check on some unusual animal reports around the lake. His boat was found 2 days later, completely torn apart. The hull was shredded. The debris suggested something massive had attacked it with incredible force. But Hornsby was never found. The official report blamed it on a boating accident, equipment failure, something mechanical. But the locals knew better. They whispered about it in that way people do when they read discussing something terrifying that they've done, to fully understand. The creepy feeling started building in me when I really thought about that story. A trained wildlife officer, this boat torn apart. No body, no explanation. Just the eerie evidence of something violent and powerful hidden beneath the surface. I asked around more carefully after that, and the stories started coming out. Fishers would talk, but only when they were sure nobody else was listening. They described seeing things in the water, shapes, large shapes, dark silhouettes that moved with reptilian grace, movements that didn't match any fish or known wildlife. One guy described a head breaking the surface, long, narrow, covered in scales, eyes that were aware, intelligent, hungry. The forgotten history of Red Lake creature sightings went back decades. Since the 1960s, there had been reports. Not many, not enough to create widespread panic, but consistent, and every few years, someone would disappear. A fisher would go out alone and never come back. Eventually, someone would find their boat, but never the body. The official stories were always the same. Boating accident, equipment failure, drowning. But the local people knew the truth. Something in the water was hunting. I should have stopped going to Red Lake. I should have listened to my instincts. But I didn't. I told myself the stories were exaggerated. Local legends, the kind of thing that happens in every small town. So I kept fishing, kept going out on the water, kept ignoring the horrible, chilling warnings that seemed to whisper from beneath the surface. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a perfect afternoon. Clear sky, calm water. I was in my boat alone, about a quarter mile from the shore. The sun was starting to get lower, painting the water gold. Everything felt normal, safe. I was catching fish, just a regular day on the lake. My radio was playing softly. Everything was fine, except it wasn't. I noticed the water changing first. The temperature of the air dropped noticeably. My breath started to fog slightly. That's when I realized something terrifying had just occurred to me. Fish done to just stop biting. They done to go silent. But the water around me had become quiet. Unnaturally quiet. No splashes from jumping fish. No movement. Just the horrible, eerie silence of something predatory entering a space. My skin began to crawl. Every hair on my body stood up. The primitive part of my brain, the part that kept our ancestors alive, was screaming at me to get to shore. Immediately, without thinking about it, just go, I killed the engine and started rowing toward the distant tree line. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was being watched. The water around my boat began to move. Not waves from the wind. The water was disturbing itself from beneath. Large disturbances. Something massive was moving under the surface. Something that had noticed my presence and was interested. The disturbing sensation of being hunted, really hunted by something intelligent and powerful, is something that civilized life never prepares you for. We're so disconnected from the natural world that most of us forget we prey animals. We forget what it feels like to be observed by a predator. I remembered in those moments. I remembered in my bones and my blood and my ancient brain. I started rowing faster, harder. The boat was responding sluggishly because I was panicking, trying to create speed where there was only desperation. The water continued to move around me. Great undulations that suggested something enormous was circling beneath the surface. Something patient, something that had done this before. Then I saw it. The nightmarish image still appears in my mind almost every night. A shape breaking the surface about 30 feet from my boat. Long, at least 15 feet long, maybe more. Covered in scales that caught the fading sunlight and threw it back in a sickly, unsettling manner. The creature, His head was reptilian. A crocodile. His head, but larger. More terrifying. And it had eyes. Pale yellow eyes with black slits for pupils. Eyes that locked onto mine with an intelligence that was absolutely horrifying. This wasn't a mindless animal. This was something aware. Something that understood what it was looking at. I froze. My rowing stopped. The boat drifted. I couldn't to move. I couldn't to breathe. I could only stare at this impossible thing that was staring back at me. Every single thing I knew about the world was being challenged by the simple fact of this creature, its existence. This thing shouldn't be here. It shouldn't exist. But it was real. It was absolutely real. The creature, its mouth opened. The jaw opened so wide it seemed to unhinge. Rows of teeth, massive teeth, yellowed and worn, became visible in the fading light. The mouth was the scariest thing I've ever seen because I understood immediately what it meant. This creature was showing me what it would do. This was a threat display. And I was about to die. I don't remember making the decision to jump overboard. My body just moved. Pure survival instinct took over my conscious mind. I dove into the water and started swimming toward the shore with a desperate, panicked strength that I didn't I possessed. The eerie silence of the water had been replaced by chaos. I could hear splashing. The creature was moving, coming toward me. I could feel it, not touching me, but close. So terribly close. My lungs were burning. My arms were screaming with effort. My legs kicked in a frantic rhythm that was all desperation and no technique. I reached the shallow water. The sandy bottom scraped my feet. I found purchase and started running toward the tree line. Behind me, I could hear the creature thrashing, a horrifying, wet sound. A sound like something massive was destroying everything in its path. I ran into the forest. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. Just crashed through the underbrush. Branches tearing at my face and arms. My breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind utterly fractured by what I just witnessed. I made it back to my truck. I drove away from Red Lake at speeds that were dangerous, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely control the steering wheel. The entire time, I kept thinking about that creature. His eyes. That intelligent, chilling awareness. The way it had looked at me like I was something it recognized. Something it understood. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Not immediately. I spent 2 weeks trying to convince myself that I imagined it. That the stress and exhaustion had created a hallucination. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen was real. Then I started researching. I dug into newspaper archives, old police reports, wildlife service documentation, and the horrifying truth emerged from the dusty records of forgotten incidents. The Red Lake creature wasn't new. It wasn't a recent phenomenon. It had been there for decades, possibly longer. There was a pattern. In 1962, a fisher named Carl Richardson disappeared. His boat was found damaged, but he was never recovered. In 1971, another man vanished. In 1989, the wildlife officer Dale Hornsby went out to investigate and was killed. The official reports glossed over these incidents, but if you paid attention to the details, a picture emerged. A creature that lived in the deep water. A creature that was intelligent. A creature that killed when it perceived a threat or opportunity. And a creature that was hungry. I've done more research since then. Marine biologists will tell you that certain species of prehistoric creatures, thought to be extinct, might have survived in isolated, deep water environments. Remote lakes, unexplored depths, places where modern civilization hasn't reached. There are creatures we don't know about. Creatures that could kill us without effort. The creepy reality is that Red Lake is deep, deeper than most people realize. The bottom has never been fully mapped. And in the darkness of that depth, something lives. Something that has been living there for a very long time. Something that has learned to hunt, to kill, to avoid detection. I haven't been back to Red Lake since that day. I thought about going to the authorities. But with what? An eyewitness account of an impossible creature? They laughed me out of the office. Or worse, they investigate, and they find nothing. The creature would disappear into the depths where it always retreats after a kill. And then maybe it would become more cautious. Maybe it would start taking fishers during the night. Maybe the bodies would never be found at all. My wife asked me once why I stopped fishing. I told her I lost interest. But the truth is more complex. I can't go on the water anymore, even at other lakes, because every time I am on water, I remember that moment. That terrifying moment when I locked eyes with something that didn't belong in our world. Something dangerous. Something ancient. I think about Dale Hornsby sometimes. I wonder what he saw before the creature tore his boat apart. I wonder if he had that same moment of awareness that I did. That moment when you understand that you are not in control. That the world is much larger and much more terrifying than you ever imagined. The horrible truth that haunts me is this. I got lucky. I survived, but the creature is still there. It's still hunting. It's still waiting in the dark depths of Red Lake for the next person foolish enough to go out on the water. And nobody knows it. It's there. Nobody believes the stories. Everyone goes about their lives thinking the world is safe, thinking we understand everything about nature, thinking that something like that couldn't possibly exist. But it does. The Red Lake creature is real. It is intelligent. It is patient. And it's still hungry. If you ever find yourself in high-level Alberta, if someone invites you out to Red Lake for fishing, if you see the water and think it looks peaceful and beautiful and calm, remember this story. Remember what I saw. Remember that some things are better left unexplored. Remember that the darkness beneath the surface of water hides more than we can possibly imagine. Because the creature is still there, waiting in the eerie depths, watching, learning, getting hungrier with each passing year that civilization ignores its existence. And someday, someone else will see those pale yellow eyes. Someone else will have that moment of horrifying realization. Someone else will understand what it means to look into the face of something that should not exist. I hope they survive it like I did. But I'm not holding my breath. Story 5. Milk River hitchhiker. She was standing on the side of Highway 4 when my headlights caught her. And the moment I saw her face, I knew something was terribly wrong. My name is Tom Brennan. I am a long-haul trucker from Montana. And what happened to me 3 weeks ago on a stretch of empty road near Milk River, Alberta, has destroyed any sense of safety I once had about driving at night. I have been hauling freight across the northern states and Canadian provinces for 15 years. I have seen plenty of strange things on lonely highways. Drunk drivers, wildlife, weather that turns deadly in minutes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what climbed into my truck that October night. It was just past midnight. I was driving south toward the Montana border, running a load of machinery parts from Lethbridge. The highway was empty. No traffic, no lights except my own cutting through the darkness. The prairie stretched out on both sides like an ocean of black, flat and featureless under a sky with no moon. I had my radio on low, some classic rock station crackling with static, when I saw her. She stood maybe 20 feet off the shoulder, illuminated in my high beams. A woman in a dark dress that looked decades out of style, the hem hanging below her knees, the fabric heavy and formal like something from an old photograph. Her hair was pinned up in an old-fashioned way. No jacket despite the freezing temperature. No purse, no phone. Just standing there beside the highway in the middle of nowhere, staring directly at my approaching truck with an expression I can only describe as desperate. I should have kept driving. Every trucker knows the rule. You do not pick up hitchhikers, especially not at midnight on empty roads. But she looked so vulnerable standing there, so out of place, that my instincts kicked in. I thought maybe she had car trouble. Maybe she needed help. I pulled over and rolled down my passenger window. The cold air that rushed in carried a smell I will never forget. Damp earth, old fabric, something underneath it all that reminded me of standing in a funeral home. She approached the truck slowly, her movements stiff and jerky like someone who had been standing in the cold too long. When she reached the window, I got my first clear look at her face. She was young, maybe 30, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed too large for her face. Pretty in an outdated way, like actresses from black and white movies. But those eyes held something deeply disturbing. A sadness so profound it felt like looking into a well with no bottom. She did not smile, did not speak, just stared at me with that horrible, pleading expression. I asked if she needed help. My voice sounded too loud in the silence. She nodded once, slowly, and reached for the door handle. Before I could reconsider, she pulled herself up into the cab and sat in the passenger seat, her movements precise and careful. The temperature inside the truck dropped immediately. I could see my breath. The windows started fogging despite my heater running full blast. She turned to look at me and finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, with an accent that sounded wrong for this region. Too formal, too precise. She said she needed to get to Milk River. She said her son was there and she had to find him. She said it had been so long, too long, and she was running out of time. I told her I could drop her in town. No problem. The drive was only about 20 minutes. She nodded again but said nothing else. Just sat there staring out the windshield, her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still. I tried making conversation, asking where she had come from, why she was out here alone, basic trucker small talk to pass the time. She did not respond. It was like sitting next to a mannequin, a very cold mannequin that smelled like old graves. As I drove, I started noticing details that made my skin crawl. Her dress was not just old-fashioned. It was genuinely old. The fabric was worn thin in places, stained with what might have been water damage or worse. Her shoes were leather, cracked and splitting at the seams, and her skin, up close in the dim light of the dashboard, had a waxy quality that reminded me of something preserved, something that should not be moving. I checked my mirrors constantly, suddenly paranoid that this was some kind of setup, that other people were following us. But the highway behind me was empty, just darkness and my own taillights reflected in the glass. When I looked back at her, she had turned her head to stare at me with those two large eyes, and I realized she had not blinked once since getting in the truck. Not once. I asked her name, trying to keep my voice steady. She was silent for a long moment, long enough that I thought she would not answer. Then she said, very quietly, that her name was Margaret. Margaret Holloway. She said it like she was reminding herself, like she had almost forgotten. The name triggered something in my memory. I had heard it before. Years ago, maybe. Some story about Milk River. Some local legend. I could not place it exactly, but it made me deeply uneasy. I considered pulling over, asking her to get out, making up some excuse. But we were already entering the outskirts of town. Just a few more minutes. Milk River is not much of a place. Population maybe 1,200. A main street with a few shops and a gas station. Most businesses were dark at this hour. I asked where she wanted me to drop her. She pointed toward the old part of town, near what looked like an abandoned church with boarded windows. I pulled over near the building and put the truck in park. She sat there for a moment, not moving. Then she turned to me and said something that made my blood freeze. She said her son, his name was Thomas. She said he would be 8 years old now, or maybe 9. She had lost count. She said she had been looking for him since 1952. And she knew he was here somewhere. She could feel it, but she could not find him. The pleading in her voice was horrible, desperate, broken. I told her, as gently as I could, that if her son had been 8 years old in 1952, he would be an old man now. 70 years had passed. She looked at me with confusion, genuine confusion, like I had said something that did not make sense. She shook her head slowly and insisted it had only been a few months. Just a few months since the night by the river, since the darkness, since the cold water. Then she opened the passenger door and climbed down from the cab. I watched her walk toward the abandoned church. That same stiff, jerky movement, her figure growing smaller in my side mirror. She reached the church steps and stopped, turned back to look at my truck, and even from 50 feet away, I could see her face clearly in my mirrors. She was crying, silent tears running down her waxy cheeks. Then she simply faded, not walked away, not disappeared behind a building. She became translucent, like fog, and dissolved into the night air. I sat there for a full minute, heart hammering, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Every rational part of my brain screamed that I had imagined it, that exhaustion or carbon monoxide or something had made me hallucinate. But the passenger seat was wet, damp with condensation and something else. And that smell, that horrible funeral smell, still hung in the cab. I drove straight to the nearest truck stop across the border in Montana. I needed coffee. I needed lights. I needed other people around me. In the restroom, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to calm down. When I came out, an old-timer sitting at the counter noticed my expression and asked if I was okay. I must have looked like I had seen a ghost. Because I had. I told him what happened. Every detail. He listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing more serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me something that confirmed my worst fears. The story of Margaret Holloway was local legend in that area. In 1952, she had been found murdered near the Milk River, her body pulled from the water after she had been missing for 3 days. She had been traveling with her young son, Thomas, but the boy was never found. Authorities suspected the father, Margaret's husband, but could never prove anything. The case went cold. Margaret was buried in the cemetery behind that old church in town. But here's the terrifying part. For over 70 years, People have reported picking up a woman matching Margaret's description on Highway 4. Always at night, always alone. She gets in their vehicle, asks about finding her son, and disappears before reaching any destination. Dozens of witnesses, truckers, travelers, local residents, all describing the same woman in the same outdated dress, all experiencing the same bone-deep cold and the same smell of damp earth. The old-timer said most people who encounter her do not talk about it. They convince themselves it was nothing, a trick of the light, exhaustion. But he believed every word I said because his own brother had picked her up in 1989 and was so shaken by the experience that he sold his truck and never drove at night again. I went back to my truck and sat in the parking lot until dawn. I could not bring myself to drive in darkness anymore. When the sun came up, I inspected the passenger seat more carefully. The dampness had left stains in the fabric. And when I looked closer, I found something that made me want to vomit. Small, muddy footprints, child-sized, leading from the passenger seat to the door and then vanishing, as if a small boy had climbed into my truck while I was not looking, searching for his mother, and found only emptiness. I filed a report with the local police, not expecting them to take it seriously. But the officer who took my statement did not laugh, did not dismiss me. He said they get reports like mine every few years. Always the same stretch of highway, always the same description. He showed me a file, thick with witness statements going back decades. Polaroids from the 70s, newspaper clippings from the 60s, all describing Margaret Holloway, all describing her desperate search for a son who has been missing for over 70 years. The officer told me something else. They had tried bringing in paranormal investigators, psychics, even priests to help Margaret find peace. Nothing worked. She keeps appearing on that highway, keeps searching, keeps asking the same question. And sometimes, in houses and buildings around Milk River, people report seeing a small boy in old-fashioned clothing, wandering alone, calling for his mother. The officer said he believes Margaret and Thomas are both trapped, searching for each other across time, unable to find what they are looking for. I have not driven that route since. I cannot. I rerouted all my hauls to avoid Highway 4 entirely, even if it adds hours to my trips. Because I know, with absolute certainty, that Margaret Holloway is still out there. Still standing by the roadside in her old dress, still climbing into trucks and cars, still asking about her son with that horrible pleading voice. And somewhere in the darkness, Thomas is still wandering, still searching, still calling out for a mother who cannot hear him. The worst part is not what I saw. The worst part is what I felt when she looked at me with those dead eyes and asked for help. I felt her pain, her desperation, her refusal to accept that everything she loved was gone. And I realized that ghosts are not scary because they are dangerous. They are scary because they show us what we all fear most. That love can trap us. That grief can destroy us. That some losses are so profound we can spend eternity searching for what can never be found. If you ever find yourself driving through southern Alberta late at night, and you see a woman in old clothing standing by the highway, do not stop. Do not help. Keep driving and do not look back. Because Margaret Holloway does not need a ride. She needs something none of us can give her. And if you make the mistake I made, if you let her into your vehicle, you will carry the memory of her sadness for the rest of your life. You will smell that funeral smell in your dreams. You will see those pleading eyes every time you close your own. The cold case of the Milk River hitchhiker remains unsolved because the answer is not in police files or evidence. The answer is standing on Highway 4 right now, waiting for headlights, waiting for someone to stop, waiting for a reunion that will never come. And she will keep waiting long after we are all gone, searching through an eternity of darkness for a child who is searching just as desperately for her. Story 6. Devil on the Tracks. The thing I saw standing on those railroad tracks had horns. Not like a costume, not like anything human could fake. Real horns, curving up from a skull that was all wrong. I am a freight train conductor, 38 years old, born and raised in Montana. I have spent 15 years on the rails, moving cargo across the northern United States and into Canada. I have seen plenty of strange things in my time. Dead animals, trespassers, even a few suicide attempts that still wake me up at night. But nothing prepared me for what happened on the road through Hanna, Alberta last October. Nothing prepared me for the devil. The run was supposed to be routine. We were hauling grain from Saskatchewan through Alberta, heading toward the British Columbia border. 2 locomotives, 43 cars, moving through countryside that looked like something out of an old Western film. Rolling grasslands, distant mountains, small farming towns that seemed frozen in time. Beautiful in daylight, unsettling after dark. We rolled through Hannah around 2 in the morning. Population maybe 2,000. One of those places where everyone knows everyone and strangers are noticed immediately. The town was dark except for a few streetlights and the glow from a 24-hour gas station. We passed through it maybe 40 miles per hour, not stopping, just continuing on toward our destination. That was when my engineer, a guy named Tom Bradshaw, hit the emergency brakes. The train screamed and shuddered, metal grinding against metal, the whole massive weight of 43 loaded cars trying to stop on tracks that stretched out into darkness ahead. I grabbed the radio, demanding to know what was happening. Tom, his voice came back shaky and wrong. There was something on the tracks, something standing there, something that did not move when our headlights hit it. By the time we stopped, we had traveled maybe half a mile past where Tom first saw it. Railroad protocol in these situations is clear. You do not back up. You walk the tracks forward from where you are, checking for damage or obstruction. You call it in. You wait for inspection teams if needed. But Tom insisted we go back and look. He said whatever had been standing there was not an animal or a person. He said it was something else, something that should not exist. And he needed to know if he was losing his mind or if I had seen it too. I had not seen it. I was in the rear locomotive, facing backward, watching the cars behind us. But the fear in Tom, his voice was real and disturbing. So I agreed. We locked down the train, grabbed our high-powered flashlights, and started walking back along the tracks. The night was cold and perfectly still. No wind, no sound except our boots crunching on gravel. The stars overhead were brilliant in a way you never see in cities, but they provided almost no light down where we walked. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating rails and rocks and the occasional piece of trash blown against the tracks. We walked for maybe 10 minutes before Tom stopped. He swept his light across the area, then pointed at the ground. There were marks in the gravel between the rails. Not footprints exactly, more like someone had dragged something heavy across the rocks, creating long gouges that ran perpendicular to the tracks. Then I smelled it, a scent that made my stomach turn. Decay mixed with something chemical and sharp, like burning plastic or sulfur. The smell was thick enough to taste, coating the back of my throat. Tom aimed his light further ahead, and that was when we saw the blood. It was splattered across the rails in dark streaks, still wet enough to gleam in our flashlight beams. Not a small amount, enough to indicate something had died here, violently and recently. But there was no body, no remains, just blood and that horrifying smell and the drag marks leading off into the darkness beside the tracks. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get back to the train, to call this in, to let someone else deal with whatever nightmare we had stumbled into. But Tom was already following the drag marks, his light cutting into the prairie grass that bordered the tracks. I followed because leaving him alone felt worse than facing whatever was out there. The marks led about 50 yards from the tracks to a small depression in the ground. What we found there will haunt me until the day I die. 3 dead cattle, mutilated, their bodies opened with surgical precision, organs removed, blood drained almost completely. The cuts were too clean, too perfect. No scavenger did this. No predator left wounds like this. And standing over them, barely visible in the edge of our flashlight beams, was the figure. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, humanoid but wrong in every proportion. Too thin, arms too long, and rising from its head, unmistakable even in poor light, were 2 curved horns. They swept back from the skull like a ram, but larger, darker, catching our light and seeming to absorb it rather than reflect it. The figure turned to look at us. I saw its face, or the suggestion of a face. The details kept slipping away from my eyes like my brain refused to process what it was seeing. But I remember the eyes, huge and reflective, glowing with a light that had no source. Then it moved. Not running, not walking. It simply folded in on itself and vanished, like someone had turned off a projection. One moment there, next moment gone. The smell intensified for a second, burning my nostrils and making my eyes water, then faded away. Tom and I stood there in shock, our lights playing across the mutilated cattle and the empty space where the figure had been. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what we had just witnessed because acknowledging it meant accepting that reality was far stranger and more terrifying than we had believed. We walked back to the train in silence. We called it in, reporting a track obstruction that had been cleared. We said nothing about the figure or the cattle or the supernatural horror we had experienced. Who would believe us? We barely believed it ourselves. But the story did not end there. It never ends there. After we completed our run and returned to our home base in Montana, I started researching. I needed to know if we had experienced something unique or if others had seen this thing before. What I discovered was far more disturbing than I anticipated. The town of Hannah had a history. In 1937, a passenger train derailed just outside of town, killing 14 people. The official report blamed a damaged rail section. But there were witnesses who told a different story, a story the railroad company buried. They claimed they saw a horned figure standing on the tracks just before the crash. Multiple passengers reported seeing it through the windows. A tall, thin shape with curved horns, watching the train approach, not moving, not reacting, just standing there as tons of metal and humanity bore down on it. The train hit it at full speed, or should have. Survivors said the figure vanished just before impact, but the train derailed anyway, as if something had reached up from below and twisted the tracks. The rescue workers who arrived found strange marks around the derailment site, gouges in the ground, scorch marks that made no sense. And that smell, multiple people mentioned the smell. The story got stranger. Over the decades since that crash, there had been periodic sightings. Always near the tracks outside Hannah, always at night, a horned figure that appeared and vanished. And coinciding with these sightings, farmers would report livestock mutilations, cattle found dead with their organs removed, blood drained, wounds that no animal could have made. The most recent wave of sightings had started just 3 months before Tom and I encountered the thing. A farmer named Douglas McKenzie reported seeing the figure near his property. 2 weeks later, he found 5 of his cows dead and mutilated. The RCMP investigated but found nothing. No tracks, no evidence of human involvement. They called it predators, though no predator anyone could identify. 2 more farmers reported similar incidents over the following weeks. Same figure, same description, tall and thin with prominent horns. Same results, dead livestock, clean wounds, no explanation. Then Tom and I saw it, and we had seen the cattle, fresh kills, still bleeding, and the thing had been standing right there, as if it wanted to be witnessed. As if it was marking its territory or sending a message or performing some ritual we could not begin to understand. I started having nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure. Those horns. Those impossible eyes that glowed with light from nowhere. I would wake up smelling that chemical decay scent. So vivid I would check my apartment to make sure nothing was rotting. Tom quit. Just walked away from 15 years with the railroad. He called me once after leaving, his voice hollow and defeated. He said he could not do it anymore. Could not ride those rails knowing that thing was out there. Could not take the chance of seeing it again. I understood, but I needed the job. I had bills and responsibilities and a life that did not allow for running away from nightmares. So I kept working, kept running routes through Alberta, kept passing through Hannah in the dead of night, and I kept seeing it. Not every trip, but often enough that I began to anticipate it. I would feel a change in the air as we approached that section of track. A tension, a weight, and sometimes, in the distance, I would catch a glimpse of a tall, thin shape standing beside the rails, watching our train pass. Other conductors started reporting similar sightings, whispered conversations in break rooms, nervous jokes that were not really jokes. Everyone knew something was wrong with that stretch of track, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Nobody wanted to be the one who officially claimed to have seen the devil on the tracks. Because that was what people were calling it. The old-timers, the ones who had heard the stories from 1937, they said the figure was the devil himself. They said he walked those tracks for reasons mortals could not understand. Maybe punishing the railroad for cutting through sacred land. Maybe just enjoying the fear and death he caused. Maybe existing for purposes beyond human comprehension. I did not believe in the devil. I was raised Christian but fell away from religion in my 20s. I believed in science and logic and explanations that made sense. But I could not explain what I had seen. Could not rationalize it away or reduce it to misidentification or stress or any of the comfortable lies we tell ourselves when confronted with the impossible. 3 weeks ago, I learned something that made everything worse. A historian at a university in Calgary published a paper about railroad folklore. In it, she mentioned the Hannah incidents, but she also revealed something the railroad company had hidden, something that made the 1937 crash even more disturbing. The train that derailed was not the first. In 1893, when the rail line was first being constructed through that area, a work train crashed in almost the exact same location. 7 workers died, and the survivors reported seeing a horned figure standing on the incomplete tracks, watching them work in the days leading up to the accident. The railway company at the time consulted with local indigenous tribes, trying to understand if they had built on cursed land or violated something sacred. The tribes had stories about that area, stories about a trickster spirit that took the form of a horned creature, a being that existed between worlds, neither fully physical nor fully spiritual, a thing that fed on fear and death and chaos. The tribe said the land should never have been disturbed. They warned that building the railroad through that specific valley would wake something that should remain sleeping. The company ignored them. They always do. Progress matters more than warnings. Profit matters more than caution. And now, over a century later, that thing still walks those tracks. Still watches, still kills, still appears to those unlucky enough to pass through at the wrong time. I am writing this because I think my time is running out. Last week, I saw the figure 3 times in one trip. Standing beside the tracks, standing on the tracks, standing so close to my locomotive that I could see details I wish I could forget. The texture of those horns, the way its body seemed to shift and blur at the edges, as if it was not entirely solid. The intelligence in those glowing eyes, the sense that it knew me now, that it had marked me, that it was waiting for the right moment. I requested a transfer to routes that avoid Alberta entirely. The company denied it. They said I was needed on the northern runs. They said I was being irrational. They said a lot of things that meant they did not care about my fear, my safety, or my sanity. So I am still running those rails, still passing through Hannah, still waiting for the night when the thing does not just watch, when it steps onto the tracks and does not vanish, when our train hits something that should not exist and derails like that passenger train in 1937. I think about those 14 people who died in that crash. I think about the moment they saw the horned figure through the windows. The moment they realized something impossible was about to kill them. The terror they must have felt in those final seconds. I think about the cattle, the precision of those wounds, the way every drop of blood was drained. What did it do with the organs? What purpose did they serve? Was it eating, performing rituals, collecting trophies, or something worse that I could not even imagine? I think about Tom, who quit rather than face this horror again. I think about all the other conductors and engineers who have seen the devil and never spoken about it publicly. How many of us are out there, carrying this nightmare, knowing the truth but unable to prove it? The terrifying reality is that we are powerless. We cannot stop running those routes. We cannot make anyone believe what we have seen. We cannot protect ourselves from something that exists outside the normal rules of reality. All we can do is keep going, keep watching the darkness, keep hoping that tonight is not the night it decides to stop watching and start acting. I am scared, more scared than I have ever been in my life, because I know now that the world contains real evil. Not the evil of bad people or dangerous animals. Something older. Something that has walked this earth longer than our civilization. Something that sees us as insects or toys or food. The devil is real. He walks the railroad tracks outside Hannah, Alberta. He wears horns and watches with glowing eyes and kills with surgical precision. He has been there since before the rails were laid. He will be there long after they rust away. And he is waiting, patient and eternal, waiting for the next derailment, the next offering. The next moment when the barrier between his world and ours grows thin enough for him to reach through and take what he wants. I cannot escape him. I can only ride those rails and hope. Hope that I see the sunrise. Hope that the tracks stay straight. Hope that when I glimpse that tall, horned figure standing in the darkness, he lets me pass one more time. But hope is not enough. It has never been enough. Eventually, the devil collects what he is owed, and I think my debt is almost due. Story 7. Shadow that circles. I should have listened when the gas station attendant told me not to stop in Carmangay after sunset. But I was chasing a story, and journalists like me never listen to warnings. That was 3 months ago. I still have nightmares about what I saw circling that windmill. The thing is, I went there looking for something scary, something creepy to boost my channel views. I specialized in urban legends and forgotten places across North America. My YouTube numbers had been dropping, and I needed content that would hit hard with the algorithm. Horror sells. Fear travels fast. I knew if I could capture something truly disturbing on camera, something unsettling and real, my channel would explode overnight. The Carmangay windmill shadow figure had been whispered about since the 90s. Locals in southern Alberta spoke about it in hushed tones, never wanting to give too many details. A humanoid silhouette that circled the historic grain elevator after darkness fell. Tall, impossibly thin, moving in ways that made your stomach turn. There were stories about people who had tried to film it. Most gave up. One journalist apparently captured footage but never published it. He vanished months later. No body, no explanation. Just gone. That should have been my first red flag. But I convinced myself it was all part of the legend, the kind of horrifying detail that makes a story stick. I told myself I was smarter than whoever came before me. I arrived in Carmangay on a Wednesday in late October. The town was barely a town anymore, just a handful of buildings scattered along Highway 3, dying slowly like so many prairie settlements. The grain elevator stood at the edge of everything, a towering wooden relic from another era. In daylight, it looked almost noble, a monument to agriculture and hard work. But as the sun started dropping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and purple, the structure changed. Shadows grew longer, the wind picked up, making the old wood creak and groan. I set up my camera equipment near the base of the elevator, mounting my main camera on a tripod and keeping a handheld for closer shots. My plan was simple: capture whatever appeared after dark, narrate the experience in real time, and upload the raw footage. Authenticity mattered to my audience. They could smell fake content from miles away. This needed to feel real because it would be real. The temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared. That is normal for the prairie in autumn, but this felt different. The cold seemed to press against my skin, invasive and deliberate. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked my equipment. Everything was recording. The grain elevator loomed above me, a dark mass against the darkening sky. I could hear the wind moving through the gaps in the wooden walls, producing a low moan that set my nerves on edge. Then I heard it, footsteps. Not the crunch of gravel or the scuff of boots. Something else. A sliding, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my handheld camera and turned toward the noise. Nothing, just darkness and the skeletal outline of the grain elevator. The sound came again, circling around to my left. I spun, camera raised, finger on the record button. The viewfinder showed only shadows and the faint glow of my equipment lights. But I felt it. Someone or something was watching me. The sensation crawled up my spine, primal and undeniable. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, to pack up my gear and drive back to the highway. But I stayed, because that is what I did. I chased fear. I documented the unknown, and my viewers expected nothing less. The circling continued, slow, methodical, never coming close enough for me to see clearly. I kept filming, narrating in whispers, describing the creepy atmosphere, the chilling sounds, the way the darkness seemed to move with intention. My breath formed clouds in the freezing air. My fingers went numb despite my gloves. Then it stepped into the light. I have tried to describe what I saw that night, but words fail. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, stretched and wrong. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at angles that made my eyes hurt. The silhouette was perfectly black, darker than the night around it, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. And it moved. God, the way it moved. Not walking, gliding, circling the base of the grain elevator in smooth, horrible rotations. I kept filming. My hands shook so badly the footage was probably unusable, but I kept the camera pointed at that thing. It never acknowledged me directly, never turned toward me, but I knew it was aware. I could feel its attention like pressure behind my eyes. The shadow figure completed one full circle, then another. Each rotation brought it slightly closer to where I stood. My breathing got faster. Panic started setting in, not the exciting fear I had felt exploring abandoned buildings or investigating haunted locations. This was terror, pure, animal terror that made me want to run screaming into the night. But I did not run. I stood there, frozen, camera recording, watching this impossible thing circle that grain elevator like a predator stalking prey. On its 5th rotation, it stopped, directly in front of me, still 20 feet away, but close enough that I could make out details I wish I had never seen. The figure had no face, just a smooth void where features should be. But I felt eyes on me, felt something ancient and hungry studying me from within that darkness. My camera battery died. The red recording light blinked out, plunging me into deeper darkness. I fumbled for my backup camera, hands trembling, breath coming in short gasps. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. Silence, complete and absolute. Even the wind had stopped. The grain elevator stood motionless, just an old building in the dark. I could have convinced myself I imagined the whole thing except for one detail. My main camera, the one on the tripod, was still recording. I could see the tiny red light glowing steadily. I had 12 minutes of footage on that camera, 12 minutes of whatever that thing was circling the elevator. I packed up my equipment faster than I ever had before. threw everything in my truck and drove back to the highway without looking back. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The 2-hour drive to Lethbridge felt like an eternity. Every shadow on the road looked like that figure. Every dark shape in my peripheral vision made my heart skip. I checked into a motel and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. I kept seeing that silhouette, kept feeling its attention pressing down on me. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and opened my laptop. I needed to see the footage, needed to confirm what I had witnessed. The files from both cameras were corrupted, not partially damaged or glitchy. Completely unusable. 12 minutes of recording reduced to digital noise and artifacts. I tried every recovery program I knew, spent hours attempting to salvage even a single frame. Nothing worked. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. When I listened to the audio from my handheld camera, I heard something I had not noticed in the moment. Underneath the wind in my whispered narration, there was another sound. Breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing that matched the circling pattern of the shadow figure. And words. Faint but unmistakable. The same phrase repeated over and over in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. Tell them all. Bring them here. I deleted everything that night. Erased every file. Formatted every memory card. Destroyed the physical recordings. I told myself I was being paranoid. That fear was making me irrational. But I could not shake the feeling that something had followed me back from Carmangay. That by filming that thing, I had invited it into my life. For weeks, nothing happened. I stopped making videos, stopped researching urban legends. I convinced myself the experience had been a one-time nightmare, a cautionary tale about chasing scary content in dangerous places. Then people started asking about my channel. Why had I stopped uploading? Where were the new videos? Some viewers mentioned they had heard about the Carmangay windmill, asked if I had ever investigated it. The comments kept coming, dozens every day, all variations of the same question. Had I seen the shadow figure? I never told anyone about my trip to Carmangay, never posted about it, never mentioned it in comments or social media. There was no way anyone could have known, but the questions kept coming. Last week, I received a package. No return address, postmarked from Alberta. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. The note said, "You were not the first. You will not be the last. It wants to be seen. It wants to be shared. Every view feeds it. Every mention makes it stronger. Stop now while you still can." I should have thrown the USB drive away. Should have burned it and never looked back. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially for someone who built a career on investigating the unknown. The drive contained video files, dozens of them, different cameras, different years, all showing the same thing. The shadow figures circling the Carmangay grain elevator. Some footage was old, grainy film from what looked like the 80s or 90s. Others were recent, shot on modern equipment. And in every video, the figure looked directly at the camera at some point. That smooth, featureless void turning toward whoever was filming. The last file was different. It was footage of me, my setup at the grain elevator, my reactions, my panic as the shadow appeared. But the angle was wrong. The camera position showed me from above and behind, from a perspective that should have been impossible. Someone or something had filmed me while I filmed it. At the end of the video, after I packed up and drove away, the camera remained. It showed the grain elevator in darkness, silent and still. Then the shadow figure appeared again, closer to the camera at this point. So close I could see texture in the darkness, patterns that hurt to look at directly. And then it smiled. I know that sounds impossible. The thing had no face. But somehow, it smiled. A terrible, knowing expression that conveyed satisfaction and hunger and patience all at once. The video ended with text appearing on screen. "See you soon." That was 5 days ago. Since then, I have been seeing the figure. Not in Alberta, not at the grain elevator. Here, in my city, outside my apartment window at night. In the parking garage where I keep my truck. Always at the edge of my vision. Always circling, getting closer with each sighting. I tried reporting it to the police. They suggested I see a therapist, maybe take a break from stressful work. I tried reaching out to other paranormal investigators, people who might understand. Most ignored me. One wrote back with a single sentence. "Stop talking about it and maybe it will forget you." But I cannot stop, because I finally understand what that thing is and what it wants. The Carmangay Shadow Figure is not a ghost or a monster. It is something older, something that feeds on attention and fear. Every story told about it makes it stronger. Every video filmed, every article written, Every conversation whispered in dark corners gives it more power. And I fell right into its trap. I went there looking for scary content. I wanted something horrifying and creepy that would terrify my audience. I wanted views and clicks and engagement. I got exactly what I asked for. Now it wants payment. It wants me to share what I saw, to tell the story, to post the videos, to spread the legend further. Every share would feed it. Every view would make it more real. And I know that if I refuse, if I stay silent, it will simply take what it wants anyway. So here I am, telling you this story, warning you, the Carmangay Shadow Figure is real. It circles that grain elevator every night, waiting for the next person curious enough or foolish enough to go looking for it. And once you see it, once you acknowledge its existence, it sees you too. I am leaving town tomorrow, driving east, as far as I can get from Alberta. Maybe distance will help. Maybe it cannot fall beyond a certain range. But I doubt it, because late last night, I looked out my bedroom window and saw it standing in the parking lot below. Just standing there, waiting. And here's the truly chilling part, the detail that keeps me awake every night. It was not alone anymore. There were others with it. Tall, stretched silhouettes standing perfectly still in the darkness. And I recognized some of them. The shapes, the way they stood. They looked like people from the videos on that USB drive. The journalist who vanished, the others who had filmed the shadow over the years. They were all there, transformed, circling, waiting for the next person to join them. I do not know how much time I have left. The figure appears closer every night, and the distance between sightings grows shorter. Soon there will be nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. It will circle me the way it circles that grain elevator, patient and relentless, until I become just another shadow in the darkness. If you are hearing this, if my story reached you, do me one favor. Do not go looking for the Carmangay Shadow Figure. Do not drive out to that grain elevator after dark. Do not film it or investigate it or try to prove it exists. Because it does exist. And once it knows you are looking, it will never stop looking back. The scary truth is that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some legends exist as warnings, not invitations. And some things in the darkness should stay forgotten. I learned that lesson too late. Do not make the same mistake I did. Story 8. Wainwright Phantom Soldier. I lost 6 hours of my life in the woods near Canadian Forces Base Wainwright. And I still cannot remember what happened during that time. My name is Jake Morrison. I am a defense contractor from Arizona. And 3 months ago I was sent to CFB Wainwright in Alberta to install communications equipment for a training exercise. I am a practical man. I deal in facts, numbers, signal strength. I do not believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense. At least, I did not until the night I followed a soldier into the forest and came out with no memory and a terror so deep it has not left me since. Wainwright is massive, over 600 square miles of training grounds and wilderness. The base has been there since World War II, and thousands of soldiers have trained in those woods over the decades. Some never made it home. Vehicle accidents, training incidents, the kind of tragedies that happen when you mix young men with heavy equipment and live ammunition. The locals in town will tell you the base is haunted if you ask them quietly over drinks. They will tell you about the phantom soldier who walks the perimeter roads at night. They will tell you not to follow him. But nobody told me that until it was too late. I arrived in late September when the days were getting shorter and the nights carried a bitter cold that cut through every layer of clothing. My job was straightforward. Install relay stations at various points around the training area. GPS coordinates, climb towers, mount equipment, test signals. Most of the work was during daylight hours, but some installations required night work to test systems under realistic conditions. That was how I ended up alone on a service road at 11:30, checking signal readings under a sky so dark I could barely see 20 feet beyond my truck headlights. The forest pressed close on both sides of the narrow road, thick pine and spruce that blocked out what little moonlight existed. The only sounds were my equipment beeping and the occasional crack of branches in the wind. I was focused on my laptop, running diagnostics, when movement caught my eye in the side mirror. A soldier was walking down the road toward my truck. Full uniform, helmet, rifle slung over his shoulder. I could see him clearly in my taillights, his boots crunching on gravel, his pace steady and purposeful. I assumed he was on patrol or returning from a training exercise. The base ran drills at all hours. Nothing unusual about seeing a soldier walking at night, but something felt wrong. The way he moved was too stiff, too mechanical, and as he got closer, I realized his uniform looked outdated. The cut was wrong. The style reminded me of pictures from my grandfather's war albums. World War II era, maybe Korea. And his face, when he passed under my lights, was pale. Unnaturally pale, like someone who had been indoors for months. He did not acknowledge me, did not wave or nod, just kept walking past my truck, heading deeper into the forest on a path that barely qualified as a trail. I watched him in my mirrors until the darkness swallowed him. Then my radio crackled with static and died. My laptop screen flickered. Every piece of electronic equipment I had started malfunctioning at once. I tried rebooting systems, checking connections, running every troubleshooting protocol I knew. Nothing worked. It was like something had drained all the power from my gear. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, growing increasingly frustrated, when I saw him again. The soldier, standing maybe 30 yards into the woods, visible only as a silhouette against the black trees. He was facing me, watching me, and even though I could not see his features, I felt his eyes boring into me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then he turned and walked deeper into the forest. Without thinking, driven by a combination of curiosity and irritation about my equipment, I grabbed my flashlight and followed. I told myself I just wanted to ask if he knew what might be causing interference. Maybe there was a jammer running nearby. Some kind of test, any rational explanation. The moment I stepped off the road into the woods, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible clouds. The beam of my flashlight seemed weaker, struggling to penetrate the darkness. I could hear footsteps ahead, boots on dead leaves, and I hurried to catch up. But no matter how fast I walked, he stayed just out of reach, always visible as a shape moving between trees but never close enough to call out to. The forest grew denser. The path, if it had ever been a path, disappeared entirely. I was pushing through underbrush, branches scratching my face, my flashlight beam jerking wildly. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to return to my truck, but something kept pulling me forward. An overwhelming compulsion to catch up to that soldier, to see his face, to understand why he was leading me deeper into this nightmare. Then I saw others, more soldiers, 3 of them standing in a small clearing, all in the same outdated uniforms, all with that same pale, waxy complexion. They stood perfectly still, arranged in a semicircle, facing inward toward something I could not see. The soldier I had been following joined them, completing the circle. None of them moved. None of them acknowledged my presence. They just stood there like statues, and the silence was suffocating. I stepped into the clearing, and that is when my memory goes dark. Not gradually, not like falling asleep. 1 second I was standing there, flashlight aimed at those motionless figures, and the next second I was waking up on the side of the service road next to my truck. Daylight, full morning sun beating down on my face. My equipment was packed up. My laptop was closed. Everything was exactly as it should be except for one problem. 6 hours had passed. My watch showed 7:15 in the morning. My last clear memory was from just after midnight. I had no explanation for the missing time. No injuries, no evidence of what had happened. But my boots were caked with mud and pine needles. My jacket was torn, and when I checked my phone, I had 37 missed calls from my supervisor and a frantic voicemail asking where the hell I was and why I had not checked in. I drove back to base in a daze, trying to piece together what had happened. I told my supervisor I had gotten turned around in the woods, lost track of time, fell asleep. He did not believe me but could not prove otherwise. He sent me to the base medical officer for evaluation. The doctor ran tests, checked for head injuries, asked questions about drug use. Everything came back normal, except I could not stop shaking. And the smell, that horrible smell of damp earth and decay that clung to my clothes no matter how many times I washed them. I started asking around about the soldier I had seen, described his uniform, his appearance, the way he walked. Most people brushed me off or changed the subject. But one older maintenance worker, a guy named Carl who had been on base for 20 years, pulled me aside and told me I was lucky to be alive. He said the phantom soldier has been seen for decades. Different people, different years, always the same description. A World War II-era soldier walking the perimeter roads late at night. Sometimes alone, sometimes with others. Carl said anyone who follows him into the woods loses time. Hours, sometimes days. One soldier in the 90s followed the phantom and was found 3 days later, dehydrated and hypothermic, with no memory of where he had been. Another disappeared for a week and came back unable to speak, just staring at nothing with empty eyes. Carl told me there are theories. Some people think the phantom is a soldier who died during training exercises in the 40s and is trapped, replaying his last patrol. Others think the forest itself is wrong, that something happened there during the war years, some accident or atrocity that left a wound in reality. Whatever the truth, the rule is simple. If you see a soldier in old uniform walking alone at night, you do not follow. You do not engage. You get in your vehicle and leave immediately. But Carl told me something else that made my blood freeze. He said the people who follow the phantom and lose time always come back changed. They have nightmares, they see things, and some of them start walking the woods themselves at night, drawn by something they cannot explain, searching for something they cannot remember. I finished my contract at Wainwright as quickly as possible and left. I told myself I would forget about it, move on, chalk it up to stress or altitude or something explainable. But the nightmares started the moment I got home. Every night I dream about standing in that clearing, surrounded by those pale soldiers, and they are all turning to look at me with eyes that are empty black holes. And in the dreams, I can see what is in the center of their circle. A pit, a hole in the ground that goes down forever, and something is moving at the bottom, climbing up. I wake up drenched in sweat, that smell of decay filling my bedroom. And I have started losing time during the day. Small gaps, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. I will be at my desk working and suddenly realize the clock has jumped forward and I have no memory of the interval. My wife says I have been acting strange, distant. She caught me standing in our backyard at 3 a.m, staring at the fence line, and when she asked what I was doing, I had no answer. Last week I checked my phone and found photos I do not remember taking. Dozens of them, all pictures of forests, trees, darkness, and in some of them, if you look carefully at the background, you can see figures standing between the trees. Pale shapes in old uniforms, watching. I went to a psychiatrist, described everything. She diagnosed me with PTSD, prescribed medication, suggested therapy. But the pills do not stop the dreams. Therapy does not explain the missing time. And nothing can erase the certainty growing in my mind that whatever happened in those woods at Wainwright is not over. That I brought something back with me. That the phantom soldier marked me somehow. And now I am part of whatever haunts that place. I have been researching the history of CFB Wainwright. There are records of training accidents during World War II. Soldiers killed in the explosions, vehicle rollovers. One incident in particular stands out. In 1943, a patrol of 5 soldiers disappeared during a night training exercise. They were found a week later, all dead, arranged in a circle around what witnesses described as a sinkhole that had opened suddenly in the forest floor. The official report called it a geological event, but the soldiers had expressions of terror frozen on their faces, and their watches had all stopped at the same time. Midnight, I think that hole is still there, still open, still pulling at people who get too close. And I think the soldiers I saw in the clearing are the same ones who died in 1943, trapped in some loop, endlessly patrolling, endlessly searching for something. And anyone who follows them gets caught in that same loop, loses time, loses themselves, becomes part of the pattern. I am writing this down because I need someone to know what happened. Because yesterday I found myself packing camping gear without remembering making the decision. Because I checked my GPS history and saw I have been searching routes back to Alberta, back to Wainwright, back to those woods. The compulsion to return is overwhelming. I can feel it pulling at me like gravity, like something has hooked into my mind and is reeling me in. My wife found me last night standing in the garage, dressed in layers, backpack ready, car keys in hand. She asked where I was going. I could not answer. I did not know. But I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to drive north, needed to get back to those woods, needed to finish something I had started. If you ever find yourself near CFB Wainwright, if you are driving those perimeter roads at night and you see a soldier in old uniform walking alone, turn around. Drive away. Do not let curiosity win, because the Wainwright phantom soldier is not looking for help. He is looking for company, for people to join his eternal patrol, for souls to fill the circle around that pit in the forest floor. And if you follow him, you will lose more than time. You will lose yourself piece by piece until nothing remains but the compulsion to walk those woods forever, searching for something you cannot name. Becoming another pale figure standing in the darkness, waiting for the next person to follow you into the trees. Story 9. Missing Hunters of Whitecourt. The bloody handprints were on the ceiling, 10 feet up, impossible to reach without a ladder, but there was no ladder in that cabin. I am a search and rescue coordinator for the Alberta Wilderness Regions. I have spent 22 years finding lost hikers, injured climbers, and people who wandered off trails and got turned around in the dense forests. I have seen accidents, suicides, and animal attacks. I thought I had seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. Then I walked into that cabin near Whitecourt in November 2004, and I realized I understood nothing about the true horror that hides in those endless woods. 3 men went missing that month. Experienced hunters, local guys who knew the terrain better than most people know their own neighborhoods. David Kramer, age 41, his brother Thomas Kramer, age 38, and their longtime friend Marcus Aulet, age 45. They had rented a remote hunting cabin about 30 miles northwest of Whitecourt, deep in the boreal forest where cell service does not exist and the nearest neighbor is an hour away by truck. They were supposed to return on a Sunday evening. When they did not show up and missed work on Monday, their families called it in. By Tuesday morning, I was leading a team into those woods, following logging roads that barely deserved the name, pushing through territory that felt increasingly hostile the deeper we went. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by dense spruce and pine. It was one of those old hunting lodges built decades ago, maintained just enough to keep the roof from collapsing but not much more. Rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, 2 small windows with shutters, the kind of place that looks rustic and charming in good weather but feels isolated and vulnerable when you are alone in the wilderness. The front door was closed but unlocked. That should have been my first warning. Hunters in remote areas always lock up when they leave, even if just for a few hours. Bears and other scavengers can open unlocked doors. But the door stood there, slightly ajar, moving in the wind with a creaking sound that set my teeth on edge. I called out before entering. Standard procedure. You never know if someone is inside, injured or disoriented. No response. Just that creaking door and the wind moving through the trees with a sound like whispered warnings. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was dark despite the midday sun outside. The windows were covered from the inside with blankets, blocking almost all light. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. Everything looked normal at first. Sleeping bags on bunks, hunting gear stacked neatly in corners. A table with playing cards scattered across it, mid-game, as if the players had just stepped away for a moment. Food supplies organized on shelves. A wood stove with cold ashes. No sign of struggle or violence or anything wrong. Then I looked up. The bloody handprints covered the ceiling. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They overlapped and smeared together in some areas, creating dark patches that looked black in my flashlight beam. They were everywhere, spreading out from the center of the room like some horrible flower pattern, reaching into corners, extending across support beams. My mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe they had killed an animal and touched the ceiling for some reason. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I was misunderstanding what I was looking at. But I knew better. I had worked enough crime scenes and accident sites to recognize human blood. The color, the way it dried, the patterns it made. And these were handprints, clear impressions of palms and fingers. Adult male hands based on the size, pressed against the ceiling with enough force to leave detailed prints. But the ceiling was 10 feet high. None of these men could have reached it without standing on something. And there was nothing in the cabin tall enough. No furniture under the prints. No ladder. No explanation. I called it in immediately. Within hours, we had RCMP officers, forensic teams, and tracking dogs swarming the area. They processed the cabin like a crime scene because that was clearly what it had become. They collected blood samples. They photographed every inch of the interior. They searched the surrounding forest for any trace of the missing men. The forensic analysis came back within days. The blood belonged to all 3 hunters, David, Thomas, Marcus, but there was something disturbing about the distribution. The handprints showed all 3 men had touched the ceiling multiple times. The prints overlapped in ways that suggested they were all up there at the same time. Together, all 3 of them somehow suspended 10 feet in the air, pressing their bloody hands against rough wooden planks. The tracking dogs found nothing outside the cabin. No scent trails, no indication the men had walked away into the forest. Their truck sat where they had parked it, keys still in the ignition, gear still in the bed. Their wallets and phones were in the cabin. Everything suggested they had simply vanished from inside that locked structure without opening the door. One detail haunted me more than anything else. The blankets covering the windows had been nailed in place from the inside. Someone had taken the time to seal every window, blocking out all natural light, creating darkness in the middle of the day. Why would 3 experienced hunters do that? What were they trying to keep out? Or what were they trying to hide from? The investigation went nowhere. After 3 weeks of intensive searching, the RCMP classified it as a missing persons case with suspicious circumstances. No bodies, no evidence of foul play beyond the blood. No suspects, no leads. Just 3 men who disappeared from a locked cabin after painting the ceiling with their own blood using their bare hands while somehow floating or being held 10 feet off the ground. The case went cold, officially, but I could not let it go. I started researching the area, digging through historical records, talking to old-timers who had hunted those woods for decades. What I discovered was a pattern of disappearances that went back generations. In 1978, 2 men vanished while hunting in the same general area. Their camp was found undisturbed except for claw marks on the inside of their tent. Deep gouges that tore through the heavy canvas. But the marks were too high, 8 or 9 feet up the sloped tent ceiling. Nothing in the forest had claws that could reach that height while standing on the ground outside. In 1956, a family went missing from a cabin just 5 miles from where David, Thomas, and Marcus disappeared. When search teams found the cabin, all the furniture had been stacked in the center of the room in an impossible tower reaching almost to the ceiling. The family dog was found dead at the top of the pile, its neck broken. The family was never found. Going back further, I found indigenous stories about that region. Warnings about certain valleys where hunters should not venture. Tales of a presence in the forest that moved through the trees without touching the ground. A thing that could reach into cabins from above. That left marks where no creature should be able to reach. That took people who strayed too far from safety. The descriptions were vague, filtered through translation and time. But they all emphasized height. Something that existed above the normal plane. Something that looked down on humans from positions we could not defend against. Something that could touch you from angles you would never think to protect. I became obsessed. I spent weekends driving out to that area, hiking the trails, studying the terrain. I talked to hunters and trappers who worked those woods. Many of them had stories. Strange incidents they could not explain. Feelings of being watched from above. Glimpses of shadows moving through the upper branches in ways that did not match any known animal. Sounds that came from the treetops. Sounds like breathing or whispering that made experienced woodsmen abandon their camps. One old trapper told me about a night he spent in a shelter about 10 miles from the cabin where the men disappeared. He woke to find himself floating. Actually floating. Suspended 3 feet above his sleeping bag, being slowly lifted toward the roof. He said he could not move, could not scream, could barely breathe. Something was pulling him upward with invisible force. Then his dog started barking, frantic and terrified, and whatever held him released. He dropped back onto his sleeping bag. When he checked his arms and chest the next morning, he found bruises. Fingerprint-shaped bruises encircling his biceps and torso. But the fingers that made those marks were impossibly long. Too long to be human. The span from thumb to smallest finger was nearly a foot across. He never went back to those woods. That was 20 years ago. He still had the photographs of the bruises. He showed them to me in his kitchen, his hands shaking, his eyes full of a fear that had never faded despite 2 decades of safety. I started having nightmares, dreams where I was back in that cabin, looking up at the bloody handprints, watching as they slowly moved across the ceiling. In my dreams, the hands were still attached to arms. Long, thin arms that extended down from something I could not see. Something that existed just beyond the edge of perception, hiding in the space above the ceiling, reaching through the wood as if it was not even there. I would wake up gasping, my own arms covered in goosebumps, my room feeling too small and too confining. I started sleeping with lights on, started checking my ceiling before bed, looking for prints or shadows or any sign that something had followed me home from those woods. My colleagues noticed the change. They suggested I take time off, talk to someone, process the trauma of the case. But how could I explain what I suspected? How could I tell them I believed something unnatural lived in those forests? Something that defied physics and logic and every rational explanation. They would think I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. Maybe the stress of search and rescue work finally broke something in my brain. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed, connecting unrelated incidents into a nightmare narrative that made me feel less helpless about 3 men who simply vanished. But then I found the photographs. They were in the RCMP evidence files, buried in supplementary materials that nobody had looked at closely. The forensic team had taken hundreds of photos inside the cabin, documenting everything. Most showed the interior from various angles, the sleeping bags, the gear, the table with cards. But 3 photos showed the area outside the cabin, the clearing, the trees surrounding it. In one of those photos, barely visible in the background, something was hanging between two massive spruce trees about 50 feet from the cabin. The photo quality was not great. The object was partially obscured by branches, but the shape was unmistakable. A human figure, suspended horizontally about 30 feet off the ground, parallel to the earth, held between the trees by something I could not see. The photo was taken during the initial site survey. The timestamp showed it was captured just hours after we first arrived at the cabin. When I was still inside, staring at those bloody handprints, something had been out there in the trees, watching, holding one of the missing men in its invisible grip, displaying him like a trophy or a warning. I checked the other photos from the same time period. In the next one, taken just minutes later, the figure was gone. The trees stood empty. Whatever had been holding the body had moved on or retreated deeper into the forest. I brought this to my supervisor, showed him the photo, demanded we reopen the investigation. He looked at the image for a long time, his face growing pale. Then he told me to drop it, said the photo was too unclear to show anything definitive, said I was seeing what I wanted to see because I needed closure. But I saw the fear in his eyes, the recognition. He knew I was right. He just could not admit it, could not acknowledge that something impossible existed in those woods, could not accept responsibility for sending people into territory where they might encounter something that should not exist. I quit 3 months later. I could not keep doing search and rescue knowing what I knew. Could not keep sending teams into forests that might contain whatever took those 3 hunters. Could not live with the weight of knowing the truth and being unable to speak it. I moved to Calgary, got a job in a warehouse. Something safe and contained with walls and a roof and no wilderness anywhere near. I thought distance would help. Thought the city would protect me. Thought I could leave the horror behind in those northern forests. But you cannot escape knowledge. Once you know what is possible, once you understand that reality contains things that violate every rule you thought governed the world, you never feel safe again. Every shadow becomes suspect. Every unexpected sound becomes a threat. Every moment alone in darkness becomes an ordeal. I still have the photo. I keep it in a locked box in my closet. Sometimes I take it out and study it, trying to convince myself I imagined the suspended figure. Trying to believe my supervisor was right and I was seeing patterns in random pixels. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to David, Thomas, and Marcus. They encountered something in those woods. Something that came from above, that reached down from the treetops, that pulled them up against the cabin ceiling and held them there while they struggled and bled and eventually vanished into whatever realm or dimension that thing calls home. The handprints were not a message. They were evidence of resistance. 3 men fighting against an invisible force that lifted them toward the ceiling, pressing their hands against wood in a desperate attempt to push themselves back down, to resist the pull, to survive. But the thing was too strong. It held them until they were too weak to resist. Then it took them through the ceiling, through the roof, up into the trees and beyond. Are they still alive somewhere? Suspended in some space above our reality? Slowly dying or already dead, displayed like the figure I saw in the photograph? Or did the thing consume them immediately, feeding on their fear and pain before discarding their remains in some place we will never find? I do not know. I will never know. And that uncertainty is its own kind of horror. What I do know is this. There are places in the wilderness where humans should not go. Not because of bears or wolves or weather. Because of older things. Things that existed before we built our cities and cleared our forests. Things that tolerate our presence most of the time but occasionally remind us that we are not the apex predators we believe ourselves to be. The missing hunters of Whitecourt learned that lesson. They went into those woods thinking they were the hunters. They discovered too late that they were the prey. And whatever hunted them is still out there, hiding in the canopy, waiting for the next group of men to venture too deep into territory that belongs to something else. I will never hunt again. Never camp in remote areas. Never trust the forest, because I know what watches from above. I know what leaves impossible handprints on ceilings. I know what takes people in the night and leaves behind only blood and questions and a horror that never fades no matter how far you run.